There is a key reason for this debate and methodology changes and deflator concern. So if you see the since about 2015, actually there is debate is going on. So why India's GDP is mismatched? So GDP, nominal GDP is estimated first, then adjusted to inflation using deflator before 2015 and arrived at the real GDP. The critics argue that if the deflator under the state's actual inflation, the real growth figure becomes the artificially high. For instance, if you see, the economists claim while officially data shows uh, low inflation, especially the household still feel high prices rise, which raises the suspicion whether the inflation and hence real growth are being measured correctly or not. Actually, this is some economists claim that while officially being measured correctly or not, because there is a huge suspicion, because there is poor coverage on informal organized sector and small firms. So India, we have the major parts of our India's economy is informal, the small shops in registered small scale manufacturing, street vendors, but data from these sectors is hard to capture reliably and often lags. So in practice, this means growth numbers may overemphasize largely registered firms and under pressure, the underrepresent what happening since the population is also huge. So large discrepancy component in the quarter annual data. And so these are some of the issues of the data. When GDP is computed via different accounting methods like income, expenditure, production, and differences between those can show up as a discrepancy. And the critics note that discrepancy component has a recently growth in share, which implies sizable uncertainty in how GDP is being measured. So if discrepancy is large, then the official number might not mean much. It could be measuring errors than the genuine growth. So, and one of the key is actually outdated base year, the 2011-12, the changes in the economy, because the base year constant prices in GDP in India 2011-12. Critics argue that in a rapidly changing economy, post GST, digital services, pandemic shocks, informal and formal shifts, these base becomes less representative because less. Some says that by the time base year is updated, structural and sectoral shifts have already been made comparisons less meaningful. So growth rate might look on paper even when underlying economy is undergoing deep changes. And disconnect between growth numbers and growth ground level economic indicators. Sometimes high growth rates are reported even when indicators like job creation, private investment, consumer demand, and real wage growth don't show comparable strength. So this time that makes people questions whether GDP growth truly means better economic condition for the majority, because government shows, yesterday government has shows that 8.2 point of the GDP, and these argue people the statistical growth not a real world improvement. So overall this is all about the actually we need to understand on the board here. So how the Indian GDP is calculated. So let's see on the board here. So who, first of all, who or what is meant by GDP? The gross domestic product here, and who in India has the authority or has the charge to calculate or measure the total GDP. The NSO, National Statistical Office, has the responsibility to measure the overall national. NSO has the charge to do the measuring of the GDP rate. The really you can see the what kind of formula the government of India uses. Government of India uses the growth rate. Here the GDP per year growth rate, actually you can see here the growth rate is equal to GDP current year subtracted, actually GDP current year subtracted from the last year GDP previous year, previous previous year and current year and previous year. So divided by the previous year, and this kind of means again upon 100. So 170, here you can see the some of the data we can assume here. The GDP in 2023-24 170 lakh crore, and in the current year, in the previous year was the GDP 160 lakh crore year, and divided by 160 multiply 100, So answer would be get here the 6.25 means GDP growth rate here might be around the 6.25. So this kind of the calculation is in the simple terms the GDP is measured in India, but nowadays actually there is a huge question and a huge debate is going on. Is our rate, GDP growth rate is representative, a representation of the real meaning, or is reflect does it reflect the real condition of the people? Because government is saying that 8.2. Recently World Bank also has lowered our situation of the GDP rate. Overall, the condition of the Indian GDP is very